Um, we are being recorded. I'll mention that. So welcome and thank you very much for being here with us today at this event, organised by Climate Action Plymouth, a local group affiliated to Friends of the Earth, which campaigns for effective climate action locally. And you'll see various of our members here today. We're identifiable by these white t-shirts or by Climate Action Plymouth badges. Please feel free to come and talk to us. Before I start, I'd like to draw your attention to a few housekeeping issues. We're not expecting a fire drill. So if the alarm goes off, please exit calmly via either the door you came into, or there's another exit at the back on the left. So just beyond the toilets around the corner. Talking about which, the toilets are just down there past the recycling bins. If we do have to exit, cross the road and remain in the car park. We've got a roster, so we check everyone off, so don't just wander off home or anything, please. Please note there are participants on Zoom, and the event's being recorded and photographed, so we'll have a photographer coming along later. If anybody in the room is uncomfortable with that, can you please let us know, particularly let the photographer know when you see her. And we'll try and avoid including you, or we'll edit you out of any recordings. As you know, I'm sure you're aware of the current energy crisis and its links to the larger climate crisis. And like us, I'm sure you're concerned that the people of Plymouth should have affordable and sustainable options for heating their homes. And so we've invited you for the launch of our new publication, Combustion-Free Heat, Power and Energy for Plymouth, which is also the launch of our campaign for Warm Homes for All. This is a campaign which will be underpinned by facts and evidence and have a base in scientific and economic realities, and that we hope will be shaped by your views and opinions, as you're here not just as an audience, but as participants in the discussion. So I'll give you an outline of how we'll spend the next 3 hours. After this introduction, we'll move on to the key presentation where David Ricknell will summarise the main findings of his book. Then we have 2 short presentations, an update from Plymouth City Council on their work. We're having a bit of trouble with the blue tag. Sorry about that. From Plymouth City Council on their work reaching their goal of net zero for Plymouth by 2030. We'll also have an introduction to the United for Warm Homes campaign from Friends of the Earth grassroots coordinator for the South West, Stuart Melvin, who's come all the way from Bristol to be with us here today. So thank you, Stuart. After that, Didier Caporal from Plymouth Energy Community will answer questions about their work. And then there'll be the opportunity for you to ask the whole panel of speakers questions. At that point, after the questions are finished, we'll break into discussion groups. During the discussion, you'll have the opportunity to help yourself to more refreshments. So if you miss getting a cup of tea and a piece of cake, all homemade, please do then. And finally, we'll come together for a thought plenary and discussion on how we move forward from here. It seems to me there's never been a better time to push forward with demands for a fossil-free future. The Skidmore Review, which was commissioned by the government and published last month, calls net zero the economic opportunity of the 21st century. And also recent research published in The Lancet suggests that net zero would add 2 million years of life to the population of England and Wales. And with retrofitting homes with insulation accounting for an additional 836,000, this enormous number, isn't it? Additional years of life for people. So it's win-win in every way. And we in the climate movement have always known that protecting the environment and reducing emissions made sense in every way. And now more and more research shows these facts to be incontrovertible. So we must press on, without doubt or hesitation, to ensure that what needs to be done gets done as swiftly as possible. Oh, I think we have somebody who's lost their way.
I was going to say to everybody, please turn your phone off.
I'll turn my phone off in a minute. Yeah. Put them on mute. So, without more ado, well, once he's answered his phone call, I'll hand the floor over to David Brickman, who's going to share with us some key points from his book, Combustion-Free Heat, Power and Energy.
Well, starting or finishing? I'll do my best.
Yeah.
You tell me at the back whether you can hear me okay. I'm just, it's okay. Good. You've all got a copy. Took a while to write. About a year's worth of effort from all of the group. So it was an interesting process, followed on from our mobility book that we did 2 years ago, which you have read. Let me just turn that off. So thank you, Ricky, for the introduction. She's explained to Climate Action Plymouth are a few icons to give you an indication as to what we're going to talk about today. Myself, I'm an engineer and naval architect, dockyard apprentice, but with a background in power and propulsion on ships, but also on land and development of diesel engines. So broad, let's say. See if we can get the technology to work. Krista, why can't we get the technology to work? On the slide?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Things change. So Climate Action Plymouth then is a group consisting of people with a varied background. And because of that, I think, some technical, some non-technical, we set down our thoughts, iterated them, finally arrived at a book 14 iterations later. It's compact, let's say. It's got a condensed set of facts, and hopefully you'll find most of them to be useful. It followed the same process as we had to write our mobility book, which incidentally also took 14 issues. I don't know why. I guess we didn't like 13. It was better than 14. But the idea is to iterate amongst the group, find out what works and what doesn't, find out what people understand and don't understand, and iterate it to try and make it accessible. What's the aim of the book then? Is to increase understanding of heat, power and energy in a zero carbon plan, to provide a reference guide, I think, to policymakers and lay people, to influence heat, power and energy policy in Plymouth, and to share widely with other climate groups, some of you here from other climate groups, for a broader distribution of ideas. The environment is a broad canvas, let's say, but we in Climate Action Plymouth have concentrated on things that produce carbon or greenhouse gases, so global warming, and the closely connected air quality. What we haven't done, but we do recognise being extremely important, is talk about biodiversity. So we're going to park biodiversity for the moment. We know it's important. We're talking to some of the council experts there, but we know it's important and has to be taken into account. But we're going to talk about carbon and air quality. So what is the climate emergency? It's a result of increasing global temperature. And those are caused by greenhouse gases. We'll talk about what greenhouse gases are in a moment. But let's say the human race faces an existential crisis if it does not contain a global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial times. This is Intergovernmental Panel Climate Control that make these statements. And how you view the increase depends perhaps upon the time scale you view it. So we put up two of the slides we worked up, two of the graphs we worked up here. 300,000 years. Okay, CO2 varied, but it wasn't a significant variation. This is the post-industrial It is sharp. And I think what we do know about survival of species is if the pace of change is gradual, it can be survivable. If it's sharp, it's really difficult. Those are problems. So if you show this graph, it doesn't look so frightening, but it sure is. So this is carbon temperature rise. And I overlay on top of this the recent reports from Exxon done in the 1960s and 70s. ExxonMobil would show what their projections were. Need I say more? I mean, the science is absolutely clear. It is greenhouse gases, but it's causing this sharp rise, whichever way you look at it. So that's the background against which we're working. And I think a significant thing that the IPCC did was acting on climate is not being restricted by a lack of scientific knowledge. Science is clear. Or technological options. I think plenty are available to us. But by entrenched power structures and the absence of political will, I think that much is fairly clear to most of us. So let's have a look where the greenhouse gases come from then, and explain what they are. So greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases, particularly hydrofluorocarbons and chlorofluorocarbons. So those are the things we want to stop going into the atmosphere. Where do they come from? They come from transport, from road cars, vans, HGVs, buses, rail, air and shipping. And we covered that in our first book on mobility. Now we have some copies of that available for some of you, if you wish to take a copy on mobility. We're not specifically going to talk about that today. It's always a fascinating diversion to head off into, but we're going to talk about the other, which is to do with energy supply and residential. So energy supply is power stations, coking for iron and steel, oil, gas, exploration, production, refining. And residential is mostly gas boilers. I think there's a thread through today's on that. And the gas boilers are used for home heating and hot water. That's what this book is about, our second book. And I think we'll gain when we go through this, it's combustion-free, which we can loosely say is we need to stop burning things, because when we burn things, that's when we get carbon dioxide, that's when we get the methane, that's when we get the nitrous oxide, all of those things associated with combustion. We haven't dealt with business here. It's a little different, and we haven't covered that in our book. We recognize it can be significant. We just haven't covered it in the book. And the other thing we haven't covered in the book is agriculture and land use. Again, really important subject. It's to do with methane and nitrous oxide rather than carbon dioxide. So maybe it'll be another book for next year. If we ever get the enthusiasm to do it again, it takes some writing. So carbon dioxide and the combustion of fossil fuels. So carbon dioxide emissions are from the combustion of gaseous fuels, petroleum, coal, and other solid fuels, including wood. They all give rise to greenhouse gases. So the UK, Great Britain, I think probably more than the UK, greenhouse gas emissions in terms of million tons of CO2 or CO2 equivalent come from gaseous fuels and petroleum. Gaseous fuels are used for space heating and hot water, and for electricity generation, gas boilers. So gas boilers in Great Britain use about twice as much, or produce about twice as much carbon dioxide as do our power stations when burning gas. Something to get in perspective. On the other hand, and we're not going to talk about transport, but it's important to mention it here, The other part of greenhouse gas emissions come from petroleum. So these are two fossil fuel gases, and that's where it all arises from. So transport is cars, vans, airplanes, and shipping. Both produce greenhouse gases, but they also produce toxic gases. And whenever we burn anything, we get both of those emissions. This is a slide about perspective. So if you add up the numbers, one gas boiler's worth of emissions for a year equates to about 10 people living, breathing. It equates to about one car driving 10,000 combustion car. And it equates to about 6 transatlantic flights per passenger, give or take. So if we talk about gas boilers, we all look out the window, we all sit in our houses, it's certainly an issue. And of course we can save carbon by planting trees. To save the carbon from one gas boiler is about 1,000 trees. So I think the point here is don't produce the carbon dioxide rather than try and worry about recovering it once you've burnt it. And that's the key message. Just some definitions then. Carbon neutral, you can achieve by buying carbon credits. I think if we followed the press recently, we're all pretty skeptical about carbon credits and offsets. Net zero carbon is what the government talks about and is of course what we're aiming to achieve. And we can do that by carbon removal or by carbon capture and storage. Both of the carbon capture and storage has its issues. We're going to talk about that a little later on. Zero carbon is what we would prefer. Don't produce it in the first place. Negative carbon would be very nice if we could pull carbon out of the atmosphere. So those are some definitions that I think are constantly confused by the press. Where do we produce? How do we consume this energy? So about 65% of our energy consumed is on space heating in the home, 15% for hot water, and about 6% on cooking. That's 86% of total domestic energy use is provided by combusting or burning gas or other fossil fuels. It's quite a challenge. Lighting and appliances about 14%. So I think, and Stuart's going to talk about this later, one of the most important things to do is to stop consuming those combustive fuels by insulating your property, improving the energy efficiency. We've got, I think, in Britain, some of the most poorly insulated housing stock, around 2/3 being poorly or very poorly insulated. This is quite a challenge. And I know from talking to guys earlier that it's a particular challenge amongst listed buildings as well. But we have a lot of stock at EPCD, and we really need to get them into C, or really we should be in a position of trying to get those at least to C and beyond to A's and B's. But now we do know how to do it with new housing stock. I think these are some of Plymouth's passive house, which means it consumes the same amount of energy essentially as it takes in. So they're negative there. So some guides really: improve the insulation of the property to reduce your energy demand. I think a lot of people are focusing on that anyway because fuel prices are so high. Upgrade your wet and cold appliances, wet being washing machines and dishwashers, cold being fridges and freezers, to the lowest energy model. And change your light bulbs to LEDs. Those are simple things to do. Electrify your heating and cooking. Change your boiler and gas hob for a heat pump or direct electric, and your hob for electric induction. Move your electricity usage to off-peak low carbon supply and avoid the peak between 4 and 7. Those have been in the press a lot lately, particularly as we've got constrained gas supply and winter. Stuart's going to talk about insulation, so we'll skip past that one. The book, I slipped that one in earlier because I think I was making the point earlier. When we started writing this book, payback times were 7 to 20 years. Now with gas prices, they're 2 to 7 years. Whole huge change in payback time on investment. I'm going to talk about heating and hot water, boilers and heat pumps. Every time you see something with combustion in it, you'll see this same black block of text. It's where the gases come from. Unburnt methane and CO2, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, volatile organic compounds, sulfur dioxide, and ultrafine particulates. We'll talk about particulates in a minute. All comes out whenever you combust anything, whatever gas or fuel, liquid, whatever, that's what you get out. In addition to which, you get a toxic condensate out of the gas boiler of around 2 to 3 litres worth of nitric acid. Has to go somewhere, it goes down the drain. So to reduce the emissions from gas boilers, to keep a condensing boiler, reduce the flow temperature. That's the water that goes into your radiators, or rather comes back from your radiators and into the boiler. And if you do that, you'll gain efficiency. Of course, you can also lower the room thermostat. Both of those have been on the news quite a lot. Alternatively, and I think preferably, you can reduce emissions by changing to a heat pump using electricity. These are more efficient than a gas boiler, although electricity prices are higher. Heat pumps use a reverse refrigeration cycle, and they extract the heat from the air or from the ground or from the water. This picture of Stithians was Brian is here. So we took this when we were down with Brian looking at the installations in Stithians. This is a drill rig for going down through solid granite, 107 meters, 15 millimeters in diameter, in a day. I have to say, before visiting, I would have said never to do that in a day. I think I learned a lot on that visit. That's a pretty impressive amount of drilling. The interesting thing about that, Brian, is that they're doing streets, not one at a time. And that really gets it. In order to make heat pumps attractive, though, you have to tackle the cost issue. And that is moving incentives from gas boilers, which you have, to heat pumps and the levies from electric onto gas. So at the moment, we are the wrong way round, taking levies for environmental issues from the cleanest fuel and giving it to the dirtiest. And 10 years ago, that may have been a good idea. Now it most definitely isn't. The government intends to address that. I think it's pretty tough to do for them politically, but it has to be done. So what's the difference between a gas boiler and a heat pump? Gas boilers have high water temperature and low flow rates. Heat pumps have low water temperature and high flow rates. Small radiators, small pipes. Large radiators, large pipes. So on a new house, easy to do. On a retrofit, requires quite a bit of engineering expertise. Your condensing boiler in the middle, the chances are if you have a condensing boiler as a retrofit in a house, it hasn't been set up to condense. When you go and look at your exhaust from your flue, it's probably a nice long stream of steam hanging on particulates, and it's not gaining the efficiency of a condensing boiler. Flow temperature is important. Reduce the flow temperature. You generally need bigger emitters, bigger radiators, maybe bigger pipes, maybe not. So there is an issue here, and I was talking to somebody earlier about this. We need very high quality training of the installers if you are to make heat pumps a success. It isn't a case of, oh yeah, let's put that size heat pump in, because it'll either be oversized or it just won't give you the heat you want. In terms of power generation, we have quite a task in terms of moving from what is essentially a lot of fossil fuels to production of electricity. This is our total amount of energy used in Great Britain at the moment for business, for residential, and for transport. Around 1,700 terawatt hours. It's a big number. You can see here, terawatt hour is 1 billion kilowatt hours. It's a big number. We have to transition from that to something in 2050 that looks a little more like this, which means we do need a significant increase in wind, offshore, onshore, and solar. The grid builds in some nuclear and some biomass. Again, biomass is combustion that's perhaps not attractive. With some carbon capture, you could argue it might fit in, but we have some way to go. And in order to do that, we have to insulate to give ourselves any chance of coming down this curve to nearer 1,000 terawatt hours. Our plans typically are for the future to get to somewhere near 800 terawatt hours. So there's a gap to be closed. But it is a very significant transformation from 2020 to 2050. Because we need to electrify heat and transport on the way. We've been very successful in this country in getting carbon footprint down from around 500 to 250 in 2020-21, and we've done that by increasing the amount of renewables we've got. There is a contribution from nuclear and biomass, but essentially it's renewables, contraction of fossil fuels. Looking towards the future, though, here we are with our share of renewables and our carbon footprint, essentially the same graph as the previous one. But this is the kind of trajectory that we need. So we need to continue to increase our renewables by 2030 to around 70%, and by 2050, ultimately, there or thereabouts, 100%. It's a kind of an S-curve in a way. The easy ones are the steeper curve, and the harder ones are shallower. That's why the timescale is necessary. And if we do that, then our carbon footprint will come down to nearer 50, from 200 to 100 by 2030, 50 by 2040, and tailing off to there or thereabouts net zero by 2050. It is quite some way to go, but that's the challenge that we have. So where are we with renewables? Well, levelized cost of electricity is about initial cost, running cost, decommissioning costs. And the government has a scheme of contracts for difference. In this case, it funds attractive renewables by setting a strike price. If the market price is below that, then which way around is it? Market price is below that, then the government contributes. Sorry, make sure I don't get it the wrong way around. And if the market price is above that, then the energy supplier pays the government the difference. So that's an attractive, safe way for people to invest in renewables. We don't know whether we can make money. Okay, there's a guaranteed level. Now the guaranteed levels here for on the latest round of allocation round for solar, wind were very attractive, 30 to 40 pounds per megawatt hour. And that is certainly below the gas price now and below the gas price pre-war. Even floating wind is there or thereabouts and below the cost of nuclear. Floating wind is pushing offshore wind further offshore, tethering it by essentially floating the platform with anchors rather than bedding it in solidly onto the seabed. So that's an important new technology. It's a good way of funding this. What we see here, though, are there are some areas which perhaps are struggling to see a long-term future cost effectiveness. So attractive though they might be in terms of no emissions, tidal stream, geothermal and wave, at the moment look as though they won't get to a cost competitiveness by 2040. But I think they're still being funded to encourage them along. There may well be a breakthrough. I think the point of this slide is if we're going to do this, we're going to do it with technology we can see and that is scalable. We have all the tools we need. We need to keep investing in others. We have all the tools that we need. What about through life carbon? Very important. Well, I think the comparison is stark here. Anything you burn is very bad on carbon. What you don't burn, biomass perhaps being the argument as to whether you recover the carbon or not, but hydroelectric, solar, wind and nuclear, non-combustion technologies are very low on life cycle costs for carbon. And that includes, as I say, taking into account the build costs. I think our aim is to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies and to refuse further exploration. Hard going at the moment. Hopefully we'll see a change in the near future. And to remove incentives for gas boilers and increase incentives for heat pumps. Move away from gas to electric. Where does our gas come from? This is 2020, about 37% of our gas comes via pipeline from the North Sea. Is it our gas? Well, it's extracted by international companies and sold on the international market. They get a license for doing so, and we now take a windfall tax for some of it. 37%, remarkably similar amount, comes from pipeline imports again from the continent and from Norway. We've seen a big increase in liquefied natural gas. So at 26% it's probably higher than that now in 2023. The issue with liquefied natural gas is it is very clean because it's been purified at source. Unfortunately, that uses a lot of energy. It's then been liquefied by reducing it to minus 163 degrees C. And that is also very energy intensive. So by the time it gets to the UK from Qatar or from Australia or from Malaysia, it has a significant carbon footprint already. And that's even before it's been burned. So LNG is something like 40% more carbon intensive, up to 10 times more carbon intensive, depending where it comes from. So LNG is not our savior, except the fact that we have an energy crisis at the moment. So for the moment, okay. Germany, of course, building lots of LNG terminals. You know, it's bad for emissions. We've exported in many ways the carbon problem to the people liquefying the gas. It really isn't a solution. 35% of Great Britain's electricity is generated from natural gas. So that's one issue. And 85% of GB's households use a gas boiler for heat and hot water. So again, the big black square, it's all emissions. In terms of power stations, it's also waste heat into rivers. This is an ecology problem. And it's also the toxic condensate, 2 to 3 litres of. So all that is covered in our book. So is it better with wood? Nothing nicer than cozying up alongside a wood burner, is there? I had one for a while, and certainly not anymore. We have a problem with deforestation, of course. We have a problem with how we count the carbon. So you always release carbon when you burn with any kind of solid fuel. When you do that, how quickly can you recover that carbon? Well, it's about 30 to 100 years. So we have an immediate problem, but actually with wood, we can't solve it until a century or so beyond. So it really isn't a solution. Log burners are very attractive. in Plymouth and in the rest of the UK, there just don't seem to be enough regulations to stop them burning in city centres. And I understand London is rapidly returning to its 1956 levels of smog, all caused by wood burning. So really does need to be done. One wood burner, again perspective, about the same as 750 HGVs in terms of toxic particulates. So we talk about particulates. Let's talk about gases first, we'll come on to particulates. So every time you burn something in air, which is largely nitrogen, you get nitrogen oxides, NOx. Cardiovascular problems, asthma and other respiratory diseases, carbon monoxide, breathing difficulties, exhaustion, dizziness, and death, which is pretty serious, I guess. Sulfur dioxide, asthma and other respiratory diseases. All of that comes from burning fuels. The change I think we've seen on smoke, which is essentially what particulates is, that in days gone by you could see the smoke and try and avoid it. Now you can't see it, and you really can't avoid it. Of course, particulates get into the upper respiratory tract, and fine particulates, PM2.5, gets into the lower respiratory tract. We tend to monitor PM10s and PM2.5s, and 2.5s includes everything smaller. But actually, with modern combustion engines, vehicles, and also with gas boilers, you're dealing with very fine or ultrafine particulates. And with ultrafine particulates, particularly with gas boilers, they go into the bloodstream, into the brain, and if you're carrying a baby, through the placenta barrier to the unborn. These are very, very dangerous. You cannot see them. I mentioned this on transport, Euro 6 or gas-fueled buses, the emissions are still there. Just can't see them. Are they clean? They don't look as though they're dirty, there's no soot, but it's still there. And it's the same with your gas boiler. And there are a lot of gas boilers, 85%. Very interesting comment from Patrick Barrett, Chief Scientific. Technology is going to be an important part of dealing with this, but it's not a magic solution. It isn't going to deal with it on its own. But if you take 2050, any technology you can't see already working, it's not going to save our bacon because of the scale at which these things need to be introduced. So we need to scale up what we can see working. Don't ignore the future technologies, the potential miracles. Just don't bank on them. So many people say, yes, but when we get bigger batteries, when we get more efficient this, when we get hydrogen working, it'll all save our... Do it with what we've got. Because carbon capture, utilization and storage is not going to save our bacon. I think we can be pretty sure of that. For one thing, even if it does, it only captures carbon, not the rest of combustion products. Carbon capture, utilization and storage, the U was quite new to us when we wrote this book. I obviously haven't been keeping up to date with it. The utilization is we can use the carbon we capture to go and extract more oil. Sort of ruins the, we can use it for other things, of course, feedstock for biofuels, in food and beverage, quite a significant industry, as a refrigerant, very useful refrigerant as well. CO2 as a refrigerant is probably the most effective and most climate-friendly one that we have. And can be used as fire protection. But once you've exhausted that, you're going to have to bury it, which means you've got to transport it by pipeline, or you've got to liquefy it and transport it by truck, and then store it in a deep geological facility, either by calcifying it, which is possible but limited capability, or simply pumping it back into where the natural gas was. Ultimately, one expects it'll find its way out again. CCUS is expensive at the moment and is quite some way away from being implemented at scale. to reduce our carbon impact. So I think we can count on a little bit in the future. I don't think we can count on carbon capture saving our bacon. Nuclear. I take a position on nuclear, really. Britain used to have a significant capability in nuclear. We had the first civil nuclear reactors. But now we're reliant upon foreign assistance. We've got 3 of our indigenous reactors, or AGRs, left, but they're run by EDF, a French country. We've got a 4th reactor of American design, also run by EDF, but that one's going to be closed in 2035. So by 2035, all of that will be gone. I've nothing against the French, by the way. It's just that, you know, they're a foreign company when it comes to energy security. Sorry. Hinkley Point C was going to be operational in 2016. It's in 2027. It's designed, built, and funded by EDF, not by the UK nuclear industry. 6 further reactors are proposed. Sizewell C is again an EDF reactor. It has approval, but it doesn't have funding. Because a significant amount of the funding was coming from China, and that's now a bigger issue. So with large reactors then, they have high capital cost, they have long timescales, 10, 15, 20 years to come online. The latest Sizewell C is built on a regulated asset basis, which essentially transfers the risk to the UK government, but not really the control. They don't follow load. In the summer, when our renewables are fully on stream, we'll have an excess of solar. We may have an excess of wind. What do we do with the nuclear power? The intention at the moment is to turn the solar and wind off and stick with a nuclear, which is not really what we want, I think. So as a backup power, nuclear has its limitations. And then we have waste management and weapons proliferation issues, which, you know, are there. It looks as though Britain has capability in small modular reactors or advanced modular reactors or stable salt reactors. But again, they don't load follow, same waste management problems, same proliferation problems. And really, they're not yet a developed technology, either technically or financially. Can making these reactors in a small factory or in a factory, shipping them out, actually make them cost effective? Because large reactors really aren't. So to come on to renewables then, these are all very successful: onshore, offshore, solar PV and hydro. And we've done very well in growing these over the past decade. Hydro hasn't really developed too much. I was an early investor in hydro. It's difficult to find the projects now to invest in. Solar PV was somewhat stilted by the government, but now we are building more in terms of solar farms, and hopefully there will be renewed enthusiasm for rooftop. Offshore wind is going very well. Onshore wind has some confusion over whether it's wanted or not. Tidal stream, wave, and geothermal are all being funded, but at the moment are struggling to look as though they're going to bring in cost-effective energy. So there are half a dozen, I think, tidal stream projects, and if they find a way of making those work cost-effectively, I think it'll be. This picture of wave is quite interesting. This is one I call onshore wave. The thing with wave generation is when you put it out deep in amongst the really serious seas, they don't last. I was brought up with Salter's duck back in 1960, I think, and really it hasn't gone anywhere since. This tags a wave generator onto breakwaters, hence we call it onshore wind. I can't find enough about how much it can generate to know whether it's attractive yet or not, but it's just an interesting take that is a technology that maybe will help us. Geothermal, in terms of ground source heat pumps, but to get heat out of a power station out of geothermal, you need to go down 6-7 kilometers in terms of drilling, or have the right kind of hot rocks. We've got some of them in Dartmoor, in Bodmin, and in Scotland, but there isn't that much geothermal that's exploitable at the moment. Once you produce all this, these are the new wind farms. These are the onshore wind farms. You have to connect them up. So today's power stations and tomorrow's are in different places. The grid has this as a problem. It has to find a way of connecting all the new sources up to where the energy is required. Big investment. And I think that's partly why the government has sort of renationalised part of the national grid. It must not be left behind. At the moment, it is trailing the introduction of renewables. We have a national grid. We've actually got a combination of regional grids. Some surprise to me that this is the case. All of these white arrows are transfer points between the regional energy areas and where it needs to go. And each one of these has its own constraint. If the wire is too thin, you're not going to get renewable power from here to here. So these are quite significant issues. International connectors were growing quite well. And I think, though there were some concerns this year as to whether people really would share their energy, it seems that we're doing quite well on sharing energy amongst Europe. France lost half of its nuclear reactors due to issues last year, but we still shared energy amongst countries. So I think international connectors are really quite important. Energy storage, coming to near the end. At every renewable energy developer, energy producer, wind, solar, hydro, tidal, we can expect to see energy storage. It makes the energy more dispatchable. That is, you can deliver it when it's required rather than just when it's generated. We're seeing some fairly big battery storage projects at those generators. 1 gigawatt hour up to 5 gigawatt hours, a lot of batteries, but make the facility cost effective. We have energy storage such as pump storage. Dinnerwig has been around since the original nuclear reactors. The idea was we couldn't turn nuclear reactors up and down, so their inflexibility meant we could store their excess energy and then bring it back onto the grid. Now, things like Dinnerwig are very useful for solving the intermittency of renewables. So we want more pump storage, but there are less available sites. Hydrogen, very useful. Extract hydrogen from excess renewable energy, store it, put it back through a fuel cell, don't burn it, through a fuel cell to generate electricity. That gives us another backup capability using hydrogen, clean, green hydrogen. And then there's distributing energy. These are some interesting little energy storages from Australia, where they seem to have invested in district level battery storage. So you'll find within neighborhoods a nice little colourful pack of batteries. It's reduced their energy price and it's reduced their peak demands. And then you get to the home. Of course, we expect homes to be provided by some solar power and to be running heat pumps, but also, and of course the homes are well insulated, but also wherever solar is being introduced at the moment into homes, it's almost always sold with a battery. Now those batteries can be quite small, but there's really no reason in the future why they couldn't be vehicle sized. After all, if you can buy an electric car for 30 grand and 10 grand of these batteries, 10,000 pound batteries, that's quite a small amount increase in actual housing cost. So they can be quite large batteries. And then there's vehicle to grid. So again, these cars, you've got 50 to 100 kilowatt hours of battery in the car. You could then, with a properly insulated home, run that home for 2 days, 3, 4, 5, 6, a week, maybe, perhaps a little longer. 200 kilowatt hours, if you're only using 10 kilowatt hours in the house, is a good battery store. When you add that to this, to this, to this, to this, I think you get a fairly robust power generation system there. It's not just one small battery, although the battery cells themselves may be tiny. It is an add up of all the stores that we can get. So I mentioned hydrogen. We're talking about burning hydrogen in our own gas boilers to save the transition. But compared to other alternatives such as heat pumps, solar thermal, and district heating, hydrogen use for domestic heating is less economic, less efficient, more resource intensive, and associated with larger environmental impacts if you burn it. And in the UK, heating homes with green hydrogen produce approximately 6 times more renewable energy than heat pumps and result in bill increases of 70 to 90%. Same with transport. You bring hydrogen into cars, they'll be 2 to 3 times more expensive to fuel than battery electric. Produce the electricity, doesn't lose much putting it into where you want it to do. If you put it into hydrogen first, and then hydrogen into electricity, you lose a lot on efficiency. Combustion of hydrogen in air, not in pure oxygen, will lead to toxic emissions. Using it in fuel cells is really important. Different types of hydrogen. Green hydrogen you get from renewables, green and clean. Pink hydrogen from nuclear, non-carbon. Grey and blue, of course, are when they produce them. You may need hydrogen, partly as an energy store we mentioned earlier, but also for large air transport, large shipping. Smaller, maybe we can do battery, but we're going to need it for larger. I think at the time I put this slide up, HGVs were partway between battery and hydrogen. I think they're tilted quite firmly in favour of battery now, with most of the major manufacturers choosing to ignore fuel cell. It's a fuel cell icon. HGV traffic. So, how are we doing, Zoe? Okay. 7 minutes. Three summary slides then. So, stop combusting fossil fuels and biomass in heating, power and energy. Install technology ready and local zero emission, non-combustion, wind, solar, hydro, tidal, and back it with energy storage. Reduce future demand, insulate. But do it with ventilation. I think when we talk about that, Stuart, but we've got a mold problem if we just insulate. Electrify heating, replace the gas boilers with electric heating and heat pumps. Redistribute environmental levies from electricity to gas. Insulation and reduced electricity price make heat pumps an affordable solution. Incentivize rooftop solar again. Incentivize domestic energy storage are things we want done. In local terms, all new buildings to net zero energy usage. I think we've had from the City Council consultations on this, as we've had on solar panels and energy storage. Improve insulation with ventilation for all existing dwellings. I think the aim should be A and B, not C. Certainly an improvement in energy efficiency. Do it by energy audit and street by street basis. I think Stuart's going to talk about it. Improve the carbon efficiency of all local authority buildings. I know that Plymouth City Council are addressing that. Identify and make available locations for suitable local solar and wind farms, and promote local energy schemes wherever feasible. I think Emmanuel, you're probably going to talk about some of this. So, what can we do ourselves? Improve the insulation of our property to reduce energy demand. Payback times are short now. Electrify heating, change a gas boiler for a heat pump wherever it's feasible. Change your cooking from gas hob to electric induction. I think a lot of press recently about the dangers of gas hobs. Again, it's combustion of gas fuel in the kitchen. If you wonder what that sticky goo is on top of your kitchen cupboards, that's what you're inhaling. So you really don't want to do that. Upgrade your wet and cold appliances to more efficient lower energy models. Do it because it saves carbon. The embedded carbon in your old machine, payback time is very short. Get whatever the best, most efficient units you can. Move your electricity usage to off-peak, low carbon supply, avoiding the 4 to 7 PM issue. Improve your boiler efficiency by reducing the flow temperature, 70 to 50 for combis, 60 degrees for the system boiler with a tank. Lower the heating thermostat, wear warmer clothes and take shorter showers. I'm sure we're all doing that. Well, some of them anyway. Shower. Use 100% renewable electricity supply where it can help. And by this, there's really no time for this. I mean, this was the World Met Organization. Greenhouse gases are all at record. The increase in methane in particular was the highest in record. Sea level is now rising twice as fast as 30 years ago, and the City Council needs to build into its planning whatever it thinks the sea level rise is going to be by 2050, by 2100, for a building that's within its lifetime, and it could be quite a lot. Glacier melting in the Alps was shattered in 2022, an average of 4 meters in height lost, and that's all going into the ocean. Rain but not snow was recorded in Greenland on their highest summits, and Antarctic and Arctic sea ice are their lowest level. So all the signs are there. So reasonably on time, I think, from those. I haven't too much. It's a quick one through the
We're going to facilitate a little bit and time to, as you notice. If you've got questions, please sit on your hands for a little bit. We've got 3 more speakers to come, and then everyone will come back up and have all the questions at the same time. We've got time for that. And then after that, Dave is also going to have a session if everyone's really interested in digging into the detail. He really struggled to get this down to this level of summary. There's a lot of information in the book, and he's going to have a little chat with anyone who wants to discuss it with him while we're having the discussion session as well. So there's a lot more chance to get into that, but I'll move on. So our first speaker from Plymouth City Council is Emmanuel Marshall. Oh no, and Paul. We are double taking excellent, Faith, and I think you've got a presentation for us as well. You have it on this system? Yeah. Then I'll pass it on to the team. This one, is it? No, the other one. I got my USB. Would you like to do it and see one of you go get you up?
Yeah, well, then hello everyone. Thanks for inviting us along. So I'm Paul Elliott, Emmanuel, and we both work the council in the strategic planning infrastructure directorate. Effectively, I lead a team that delivers projects to support the council in realising its net zero ambitions. And Emmanuel works within a planning team to do the same. But I'll let Emmanuel talk a bit more. Emmanuel can start now.
Good morning, I'm Emmanuel Marshall. I'm a low carbon city officer at the City Council. What a really hard act to follow. I am no expert, and what I can bring, I guess, to this is bring to you the information that experts give us, and to try and help with that, bringing the climate emergency into context. So today I didn't really come to give much of an update on what the council is doing. I just wanted to bring relevant information to you in the context of a conversation about energy. So I am reporting information from a report which we commissioned from Exeter University, from the Centre for Energy and the Environment at Exeter University, which I hope will help provide some local context and in a way illustrate some of the presentation that David just briefed. Yeah, so I think you think I figured out how this works by now. Is it? How do you look from one side to another? Sorry, so we can.
It should be an arrow, shouldn't it?
Yeah, there should be an arrow. If you just click on the slide.
Yeah.
Just click on the slide. Lovely. Okay, so just data. This data is available publicly, so you'll be able to access it on our website, and I've put some notes there about the content. But this is just the kind of Plymouth version of some of the information that they shared with you earlier on. So this is how we currently, as current as possible, emissions profile from Plymouth. So what we do is we commission the University of Exeter to crunch the data for us. There's a data lag, so the most recent available data goes back to 2019. And that gives you an idea of how the emissions at the moment are apportioned in the city. Exeter University accounts for data slightly differently to national government. And so we've got this presentation which is slightly simplified. But obviously, when it comes to energy generation, you have obviously buildings contributing mostly because of the need for heating and power generation need for electricity. So that's, like I said, a big chunk of emissions in Plymouth. How are we doing? So I presented this information at Future Plymouth 2030 a little while back in December. So it's a bit of we have sort of some of the things I've already presented, but I think they are quite useful. So emissions in Plymouth in 2019 were in the order of about 1 million tons of CO2 equivalent, going down, but as you can see, not going down at the pace that we need them to. Again, short explanation for that data lag. It takes some time. We get the information from central government. It takes them some time to analyze and put the data together. And by the time we've also passed it on to Exeter University for that analysis, there's always a bit of delay. We have commissioned Exeter University to provide data on the 2020 emissions, where we expect to see some shift in the emissions from a transport point of view owing to the effects of COVID-19. Okay, and that's a bit of a breakdown again by theme of where the emissions are. And as you can see, I think quite consistent with what David was showing us earlier on, that the power sector has decarbonized the most effectively, and it's the main driver for that cut in emissions. However, there are some sectors that are not clearly not progressing at the pace that they should, and that's building and transport, almost going against that trend that we should see. Again, I'll be very curious to see the conclusions of Exeter in the next few months to see how COVID-19 impacted that sector. It seems from the figures I saw nationally that actually the sector took quite a dip and hasn't quite recovered to the level that it was in 2019. So there has been a small shift in usage of transport, but we don't know again how it recovered in 2021 or at the beginning of this year as well. So, right, so okay, and some of the conclusions from Exeter I thought were particularly interesting and relevant. We asked them to translate the challenge away from terms of emissions, which are very, an easy way to communicate the scale of the challenge, to what does it look like in practice? If we were to achieve that net zero by 2030, what change would we need to see in our city to make that happen? And consistent with the advice that David gave earlier, we'd need the equivalent of solar photovoltaic panels on about 34,000 homes in the city. I think our home household count is about 120,000 homes in the city. So that's, you see, a scale of about a quarter of them getting PV installation. We need the huge increase in solar panel installation rates. So currently there's about 310 installed in the city each year. We need to bring that number to 3,000 in order to achieve that. And then we need connections to low carbon build heat networks. So again, at a scale and at a pace that is staggering. So 60,000 homes do not have loft insulation. And about 34,000 homes need either cavity or solid wood insulation. And we need a total of about 8,000 heat pumps installed in Plymouth homes by 2030. And then that, in addition to that, that's all the non-domestic buildings, so business premises that need better energy efficiency. So I think you can't resist a deep intake of breath when you look at this, you know. And so this is to achieve a 2030 target. And I'd say hands on heart, it is the right target to set from a philosophical point of view. The sooner the better. We need to really channel energy and get people's, you know, energy behind this. But it is a really, really tall, technically a very, very tall order. It will require a lot of collective effort behind this, and we need to just get as far as possible towards achieving this. Oh no, there's one slide I added. I'm sorry, I seem to have skipped one that I really wanted to share with you, because, and it's about climate connections. So again, it's a shout out to the work that my colleague Lou has put together very aptly. I wanted to show you screenshots. If you haven't been to Climate Connection Plymouth yet, go and take a look. It's a site that we brought together to try and channel everybody's energy behind this agenda. So I'm annoyed with myself. I really thought I'd put that slide in. Is there a way of like going back just to make sure I've not skipped one? Sorry, I'm kind of looking to my expert. I don't know if it's me, or I could maybe take you to the internet and have a look at it with you. Because climate connection is really about building that momentum and that consensus, because everybody needs to. I don't know if I can just. Let's do one slide. It was my last one as well, so no, that's all going further forward. Is that no, I don't, someone said it's not. Well, anyway, that was my concluding comment, I think, was the main notion of trying to work together to achieve that. And the idea is to share good ideas, share experiences. I was speaking to someone earlier on talking about installing a ground source heat pumps. I think it would be fantastic to share a case study on the website, showing people, this is it. Yeah, so it was there, I'm not very nice. that could happen. Yeah.
Maybe the slide is hidden.
Maybe the slide is hidden. Yes, that could be expected. If you right click and hide slide, that might be. Yes. Yeah. But anyway, this is a screenshot of Climate Connections Plymouth. It's been made to be attractive, engaging, to communicate easily. It's really Plymouth based with Plymouth projects. So I would recommend it. So it's Plymouth Connection. Climate Connections Plymouth.
No dashes.
Right, I'm going to hand over to Paul. So I wanted to be quite concise. So I'll hand over to Paul for a quick overview of the projects that the council is leading. And we're done.
Thank
Do you want me to keep this one up, or it's the same slide?
Go on
It's
to
just the
different
next.
Thank you. Well, yeah, hi everyone again. So, as I said, I manage a team, low carbon team to council. We secure funding basically, and then deliver mainly capital projects that help us get to that net zero target. And so, I'm just going to spend 5 minutes, very briefly, talking through some of the key projects at the minute that we're delivering to try and get to that target. So, to pick up on, one of the themes of here in terms of energy generation. So this year we are attempting to build a solar farm on the northern end of Chelsea Meadow. It will be the largest community-owned solar farm in the country, generating 30 megawatts with 2,800 homes, etc. With a considerable amount of carbon saved, effectively 60% of our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and without forgetting the biodiversity element, looking to make a 25% net gain on that site. But all of these slides I'm putting up, by the way, please don't misinterpret them as kind of bragging slides. Effectively, what they're doing is demonstrating the scale of the challenge. So, that's great, brilliant. Solar farm, nice big solar farm on a bit of land that can't be used for anything else. Fantastic use of land. actually we need one of these every year until 2030 if we're going to make a difference. And to speak to David's point earlier around grid connection and joining everything up, if we went to Western Power, who are confusingly now named National Grid, tomorrow and said, can we build another one next year, please? They'd say, you can build it, but you can't have the grid connection until 2032. So, you know, there are significant challenges. Well, there's significant challenges regardless, but in terms of that future delivery of these things, there are lots of interplaying factors that we need to consider. So, from a power generation point, that's one project that I thought worth highlighting. And then the kind of decentralization point, and David spoke about energy security and trying to reduce the risk of our supplies being cut off. So we're doing work in the city around district heating and heat networks. So this is effectively, you know, you have however many hundreds of buildings, or why have hundreds of separate boilers or heating devices? Why not just have one and connect them all to that? There's efficiency gains there. It makes sense. So we've got a central area around the law courts, the Guildhall, Council House, the Civic Centre, where there's a heat network going in. There's some additional work looking at maximising the opportunities that the energy from waste plant can bring. We still don't get the full benefit from that, and certainly the people, the buildings and occupiers of those buildings close by still don't get the full benefit of what could be achieved there. And then some really interesting stuff from a European project actually that we've still managed to cling on to, called D2 Grids, which looks at fifth generation, so it's termed heating and cooling. And what we're looking at doing is using the heat of the sea, filtered by our natural bedrock, and effectively we've drilled a borehole, which yields some really decent, low grade but consistent heat. So the concept is, well, how can we use that and then have smaller heat pumps in individual buildings just to raise that temperature enough to provide the required heat. So that's some really interesting stuff that we're doing with partners in Europe as well. I'm conscious of time, so that's why I'm running through. I'm really heartened that this is part of the Warm Homes campaign. When I joined the council in 2007, fuel poverty, domestic retrofit was my bag. That's what I did day in, day out. So I'm really pleased that this is an issue you're taking to heart. And as I said, these are not bragging rights. This is just to illustrate the scale of the challenge. So in the last 4 years, the funding we've secured from bits and pieces, that's the amount of homes that we've helped. These are all what we term vulnerable households. Effectively, they're fuel poor. They're on low levels of income. And this is what we've currently got until 2026. So, further, I haven't worked that out, about 1,200 homes, something like that, isn't it? With measures changing from when I first started in 2007, it was all about let's get your cabinets and lofts done. Now it's recognising we need to go further. The point, David, around going from what was a D or a C to an area B. We need external wall insulation. We need heat pumps to really drive that forward. There's some interesting points here though around Plymouth is 90% mains domestically, 90% mains gas heated. So that's a big driver. Government funding that we receive and bid for is predicated on non-gas properties. That's a slightly outdated theory based on the fact that at the time of policy making, electricity was much more carbon intensive than gas, and also much more expensive than gas. And we're seeing the differences in both carbon and price with electricity and gas level. So there needs to be a shift at a government to recognise that, because for a city that's 90% mains gas heated, the fund is predicated towards electrically heated properties. There's a lot of people going to miss out. So there's cause for concern and lobbying. And finally, I know this isn't about this session, particularly about transport, but just to highlight, we are looking at and delivering on the electrification of transport. Government policy is very clear that is the future. But I like to think of it in the round rather than just electric vehicle charging points. So from March, we get 90 e-bike locations. There's some outside the barrel bikes. It's a really nice big step forward in enabling a modal shift of how people move around the city. E-bikes for rent, effectively, with 90 locations to take them to. We've put 315 charge points in already, electric vehicle charge points. There's another 300 going in over the next 15, 17 months, something like that, which will take us to 615. We've also got the e-ferries, which is an area of transport that we don't really, probably a lot of people don't think about in Plymouth, but actually, how can we utilise the sand better to move across the city? We've got the e-ferries that help. So I think that's it. Like I said, I didn't want this to be, it's not bragging rights, it's highlighting the scale of the challenge, but to reassure, I suppose, that there are some, there are projects in place delivering, try and tackle some. I'll shut up for now. But thank you.
Thank you, Manuel, for that. Really doing this right into project, which is really useful for what we want to do as a campaign. I'm now going to introduce Stuart Melvin from Friends of the Earth. You will got one of these on your seat, and he's going to have a chat about that campaign, which is Friends of the Earth.
Really hard, it's two screens.
Get someone on the side, I don't want it.
They ran out.
I just put.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone, thank you for having me. I am Stuart Melvin from Friends of the Earth. My job role is slightly long-winded, grassroots development coordinator. More or less what that means is I provide training support to grassroots activism. I will focus on our campaign more than the sort of technical and science aspects of this. I think David has more than covered the scale of the problem, but also the fact that we actually do have the solutions. We have the technologies. We are facing a problem, as the IPCC puts it, as David referenced, of entrenched power structures and lack of political will. So we're working on this campaign to shift those things. However, just to cover it a little bit, and from a social justice angle as well, we're obviously all, I think, probably familiar and aware with the problem with the carbon emissions, with climate change, but we also know that over the last 12 months, energy bills have almost doubled. Paul obviously mentioned the people that are fuel poor, and that is a section of society that has suddenly exploded, and there's much more people than it was just 2 or 3 years ago. People are really, really struggling. And of course, we then have to add that context in when we're talking about what we personally do to change our own lifestyles or, insulate our homes or do any of these things. We're all skipped. That's a problem. Added to that, UK homes are more or less the worst in Europe for leaking heat. And again, I think there's a fair point here about being quite angry about this. This is coming to a crunch point, certainly in terms of climate change, but also obviously in terms of economic and social justice. But our homes have been allowed to be like this for decades with no action really from our government. And obviously we've heard that over 80% of homes depend on climate-wrecking gas. So what are the solutions? Well, Friends of the Earth are making the point that there is a really urgent need for additional financial support for all of those people that are suffering the impacts of fuel poverty. This is, and David, of course, referenced that there are certain things happening where they may not be the long-term solution we want for climate change, but immediately these are things that we need to help people here and now. Interestingly enough, of course, the government have taken some steps. We know that the outcry over not just the increase in our bills, but actually the increase in profits made by the energy suppliers has pushed the government to put some financial support in place. And of course, we've seen in the last couple of days energy firms being told to stop forcing people to have prepayment and smart meters and things in their homes. But it doesn't go anywhere near enough. There is a long, long way to go on this. And just to put it in some context, some of what we're talking about in the next few slides and what David and our friends from the City Council as well are alluding to, fundamentally, we're talking about money. We're talking about money being moved from being given, excuse my kind of simplistic narrative, but being given to the bad guys and being given to the good guys. We have, in the last 2 years, it's not quite as simple as I'm about to make it sound, but we're more or less given £700 billion to the super rich in the last 2 years alone. 700,000 million, just to put that in some context. Unfortunately, friends of the earth, we've won quite a few good legal cases recently, but we've just lost a legal case which was seeking to stop the government investing in a new liquid natural gas field in Mozambique. So we're continuing to see the government invest in the extraction and processing of fossil fuels. As we've also seen alluded to, we also have kind of historically good things which are becoming not exactly the right thing to do. So we are seeing subsidies put onto, getting people off of electric and onto gas, which is completely the wrong thing that we should now be doing. So we need to move money. The point I'm making, I guess, is there is money out there. It is just in the wrong places and in the wrong hands and being given to the wrong stuff. But 2 and 3, I'm just going to skip between these slides because they're kind of interchangeable. Number 2, the insulation program, and number 3, permanent fixes to our failed energy system. We know that we have to insulate those huge numbers of houses. We know that we need to move onto heat pumps, onto solar, onto all of the things that David's book so eloquently explains and takes us there. The question is, how do we get there and what's standing in the way? How are we going to win? So, Friends of the Earth are putting pretty much all of our effort at the moment into this new campaign, United for Warm Homes. As has been said, we have kind of 2 dual problems. One is homes and buildings and power, the other is transport. There's a lot to be done on that as well. But our buildings and heating is our biggest problem at the moment. Transport is growing, and that is in its own way another problem. But we're going to focus on United for Warm Homes. The aim here is, I suppose, to do a few different things. One is, I think, part of our other campaigns around fossil fuel extraction is to kind of culturally toxify gas. We have effectively made the concept of oil extraction pretty toxic over the last 10 to 20 years. It still gets invested in, it's still happening, but we have, as part of global movements, divested trillions from oil extraction. We have seen broadly people accepting that continuous extract oil from the ground is not a good thing. Gas doesn't have quite the same connotations yet. And until it does, we're going to continue to see this happening. So one side is a sort of cultural toxification of gas extraction and processing. The other, as I say, is political will and combating those vested interests to move finance, to move money from where it shouldn't be to where it should be. How can we do it? I'm going to work backwards on this. We need to get political. There is only so much that we as individuals can do. And of course, if we can do it, we should do it, obviously. But there is only so much that we as individuals can do. There is only so much that our allies and our friends in city councils, in the civil service, in business, locally, can do, whilst we are still seeing these billions and billions and billions of pounds being moved to all of the wrong places. We have a general election soon, guys. That'll be fun. We have a general election at least sometime in the next 18 months. It's a huge opportunity. Now, Friends of the Earth, I want to make really, really clear, we are a non-partisan, non-party political organisation. We are not seeking to put any political party in or out of power. However, a general election is obviously an opportunity to put incumbent elected politicians under some significant pressure, as well as those candidates who are saying, elect me instead. Okay, let's see what you are also going to commit to doing on this. Part of the thing here is to recognise that some of this might sound a little bit kind of, I suppose, aggressive towards our political system. That's not really an intention. However, we know that on the one hand, we've got people trying to fight a good fight within city councils, within different regional and national bodies. And that's really, really difficult when they're not getting the money that they need, or as I say, when the money's going to the wrong places. And of course, we have to accept that no matter how positive a politician is on our agenda, ultimately, we are only one of the many voices that they're coming under pressure from. They are also coming under huge pressure from the oil and gas industry, from those people that are causing all of the problems. And their pressure is organised money. Therefore, our pressure has to be organised people. We, for the most part, don't have the billions of pounds to say, well, we'll do this or we'll do that, including the threats that are often made of we'll take jobs out of the country and cause you all kinds of problems. What we can say is, well, we have millions and millions and millions of people with us. So over the next year and a half, we need to lobby, and we need to lobby hard, and we need to get engaged in general election campaigning. That might, we're still exactly working out the detail of what it means, because we have to make sure we comply with our rules as a charity and things like that. But that might take the approach of seeing which politicians make the pledge to do the things that we're asking, and then simply promoting that and letting people know. And of course, encouraging people to use their vote, whichever way they choose to make it, with the information they have in front of them. But to have that hold clout, we have to be more than we are. For the longest time, the environmental movement has been pretty well supported in the UK. Generally, we know that, you know, statistically speaking, most people are with us. We have 85% support for urgent decarbonisation policies, and if you check into the individual ones, generally people are supporting most of them. However, of course, on the doorstep, when candidates or incumbents knock on the door and ask what are the most important issues, it's not always one of the things that comes up. It's maybe not the most urgent for most people who are struggling with fuel bills and with getting a doctor's appointment, and, you know, whether there are enough jobs in the area and all of these kinds of things. So we have to change that. We also know, of course, that our movement typically has been made up of a reasonably tight section of the demographic of the UK. It is reasonably white, it is reasonably well off. It's not exclusively, it's not quite as simple as that, but we have to be more. We have to be bigger, we have to be more diverse, we have to include everybody. We have to make sure that our solutions don't punish anyone. Solutions cannot cost people who are already struggling thousands and thousands of pounds. Our solutions have to be taking the money, as I say, from the people who are making billions and putting it where it's needed. For that to happen, and to let the political candidates and incumbents know that we have that base of support, we have to be able to show it through collective action. We have to be able to work together. Key moments, weeks of action, all of the stuff you would expect campaigners to do: mass petitions, mass online actions, collective lobbying of politicians, anything else you can think of, street protests, media work, stunts, art, big public meetings, all of these things where we're going to show that we have that type of support. And of course, we're working with lots of other organisations through the Warm This Winter coalition. How do we do it? We build local support. We are launching and supporting local activists like Climate Action Plymouth to launch these campaigns all across the country. We are supporting people with training, with resources to engage in thousands and thousands of community conversations, speaking to both local organisations and ordinary citizens about the campaign and how they can get involved and what they can do to make the difference. We are organising large-scale kick-off events. This is a little bit like a kick-off event, but we're looking to make them bigger. We're looking to bring lots of people from very different organisations together who are ready to take action. The idea here is that we effectively make the campaign a coalition at a local level that engages, as I say, not only environmentalist organisations, but any stakeholder with a concern about both climate change, but also, as I say, fuel poverty, social justice, actually the future of our economy, the future of our society. That could be religious organisations, it could be schools, it could be health organisations, it could be trade unions, it could be community groups, etc., etc. I can go on and on. How do we do that? Mapping. So I know that the breakout discussions in a little while, some of that, there is one where David will go into greater detail with work if people will ask that, but the other ones we will be talking about some of these questions that we've seen sort of up on the board, sort of falling down, around what can we personally do to influence the political process, but also what other groups and communities can we get involved? Who do we each know? Let's think about our personal networks. You know, we might know people in our doctor's surgery, in our workplaces, in our football clubs, you know, community centres, local shops, local pubs, cafes, etc., who we can ask to help spread the word and get more and more people involved. The conversations that we have with people have to be humble conversations. Obviously, we have to speak the urgency and the scale of what we're seeking to do, but we also have to understand where people are. We have to understand their competing priorities, their competing concerns and worries and anxieties about the future, about not just the future, but their current situations, the challenges that they're facing. And if we don't understand who people are and where they are, we're not going to bring them with us. So this is about listening as much as talking. But ultimately, the aim here is to gather united for warm homes pledges, which is organisations especially, each with their own network of contacts and supports, and individuals saying, yes, I pledge to take action as part of this campaign over the next 18 months. And we can ask them specifically to do the certain things that they can do best. What support are we providing as a national organisation? Well, there's a website, unitedforwarmhomes.uk. There's one-to-one guidance from our regional campaigns organiser, Mike Burkett, and myself. We have a full training programme on how to do community organising and campaigning, and we'll support anybody to go through that. And of course, we'll produce the usual, the resources, the colourful things and the bits of cardboard and the paper. Anyway, also small grants if groups need it, around £500 to help fund the campaign, as well as connecting activists across the country through monthly campaign calls to share ideas and experiences and things that are working and things that aren't working. The campaign is also being adjusted on a daily basis based on the feedback that local grassroots activists are giving us. So, for example, in the West Midlands, our group in Birmingham have found that the pledge on its own was better as an open letter. For some reason, I don't know why, but psychologically, we've got more people to sign up on an open letter than on a pledge. Don't know why, but so we're changing it. So share those things. No, all they've said is I think that when we've written it as an open letter to the government, rather than you pledge to take action, more people have signed it for some reason. I don't know why, but the point is, I guess, that we'll be changing the campaign as it goes on. So it is a co-collaborative campaign with grassroots and with local people working on it and telling us what's working and what's not. That's the campaign. I just want to come a little bit back to the solutions just a moment, just to finish on. Again, both of our previous speakers have spoken about how we deliver this at scale. We are back in terms of insulation and retrofit, we're back in a street-by-street insulation. There's, I suppose, three key elements to it. One is that we are clearly demanding that this is government financed. We know that only the government can move the finance quickly enough at scale to make this happen, to enable you guys to do what you need to do at a local level. But there was a report out a couple of days ago, this is a bit of a tangent, there was a report out a couple of days ago showing that one of the biggest problems in the BBC is how often our economics commentators really don't understand basic economics. And we've had 20 years really for comparing government finance to household debt, and there's just nothing like each other. The government can spend, it's okay. Problem is, as I say, we're getting to the wrong places, but we can move that money. So government finance, because that's the only thing that's going to make it happen big enough, quick enough, fast enough. Locally delivered, local council delivered. We have seen too many schemes already where effectively what's happened, unfortunately, is that often the government have effectively just thrown the money away, given it to national organisations, to swoop into communities who don't really know how those communities work, don't know the best places to do things. We've even seen some organisations which are effectively cowboy organisations which have been able to take advantage of these schemes and take public money and deliver very little for it. Councils and community organisations like us are the right people to deliver these schemes at a local level. We know how our communities work, we know where we need to prioritise, we know where the land is, these things. Of course, we also have major skill shortages, so there is a huge amount of work to do and high quality training and support to get the workers in the right place to actually deliver these. So these do need to be council and locally delivered. Of course, that also puts it under democratic direction as well. It gives the local community a stake in what's happening, makes it less about something that's being done to you and something that you yourself are collaborating and participating in. But thirdly, as I mentioned, street by street, we know that the evidence is there that there's kind of two sides to this. One is the economic and financial efficiencies gained, particularly if you're doing things like ground source heat pumps. You're showing that if you've got to bring a huge drilling rig, you may as well do all the houses at the same time, you know. Those are the economic and financial efficiencies. But what we also have is cultural and social change happens at that level. These are not new technologies. Heat pumps have been used for a very, very long time. However, they are new to most of us. Most of us are used to gas boilers, we're used to gas hobs, we all like them. To suddenly say, I'm going to throw that away and move on to this thing, I'm not really sure how it works. And if I read comments on Facebook, some people say they love them, lots of people say they hate them. I don't know what to do. And so we look to our friends. We look to our friends, to our neighbours, to our families. Have you got one? Are you thinking about it? Oh, no. we have to start to see these things happen within social networks. People have to say, actually, 50% of the street have said we're going to do it. And all of a sudden the other 50% goes, yeah, okay, we're on board too. That's how you make change happen at that scale. But that's slightly difficult, where of course we do also need to prioritise those vulnerable households and people suffering from poverty. But unfortunately, we're still a relatively economically segregated society. We often find that these are neighbourhoods and these are streets where people are living in similar circumstances. So again, a street-by-street programme like that, economically efficient, socially and culturally effective. Those are the ways that we're going to be able to move these. Not really sure how long I've taken, but I'm going to finish it there. But yeah, well, as I say, in the next groups, we're going to get practical about this. Who else do we need to bring in? Just as an example, some of our biggest trade union branches in and around Plymouth will have 5,000 to 6,000 to 7,000 members that they can reach out. We know the political majorities around here they look reasonably large and safe. They're not quite as safe as they make out. They've changed a lot in the last few years. So they're open for some influence. I'll leave it there. Thanks, mate.
Now I'm just going to welcome Didier Capro, and Didier and Marcella have a stall at the back there with loads of information from Plymouth Energy Community. Didier's going to kick off the question session effectively. I've got a few questions for you.
Yeah,
and
okay.
Then I'm going to open it to the floor if that's okay.
No.
And then we'll bring all the other speakers back up and have more of a panel for general questions. I mustn't forget that we have a Zoom audience as well. So if anyone on Zoom has a question for any of the speakers this morning, type it into the chat and hopefully Malcolm will rush through with those, and we'll hear from you as well. So Didier, could you just briefly describe who Plymouth Energy Community are?
Sure, yeah. Plymouth Energy Community has been going on for about 10 years now. So I joined PEC, as we're known as, about 3 to 4 years ago. And my understanding at the time, and it hasn't really changed much, is that they were working in close partnership with Plymouth City Council. So everything that Paul and Emmanuel have said so far remains true. But PEC is also its own entity and does its own things. But basically, the main aims are to tackle fuel poverty and also to tackle the energy crisis. So it's a two-pronged approach. We work at a community level. So in a sense, the discussion we're having today, whereas it was always quite strategic, big numbers and everything, hopefully, is that right? No, sorry. I can sort of maybe bring a bit of an insight to what happens at ground level, because we are delivery partner, as I said, with Plymouth City Council. We've done a lot of home visits. We had the delivery of some schemes onto the retrofit side of things, amongst other things. So I'm happy to take some questions. Hopefully that set the scene.
What would you say makes PEC unique?
Right. Ironically, last week I went to a conference from the NEA, which is the National Energy Action Organization, which was held in Birmingham. I was volunteered to go there for 3 days, and it was fascinating. The theme was about fuel poverty, mostly the energy crisis. But I realized that there were about between 250 and 300 delegates there. And really, all those people, this was really sort of encouraging to see that all those people had the same aim, to sort of help the people who are the most deprived, and also try to tackle the energy crisis. And the two things are not always compatible. It's a very hard job. But I would say that all those people have got that in common. But they also deal with different sections of the country geographically, but different communities. So they are different in as much as they've got their own local knowledge. And the same applies with Plymouth Energy Community as well. Plymouth Energy Community may also be different in as much as they've been going on for 10 years. They've successfully delivered many schemes with Plymouth City Council. and other organizations. They're good at getting some funding. They've got a good knowledge of the city and collectively of all the communities that make up part of the city. So maybe I could bring in a couple of other things as well. They tend to be very good at thinking outside the box. We work with Art and Energy, which is a sort of, I think it's a charity as well, that sort of put the problems we face into a different context, into the context of art, for example. And as the name implies, art and energy, two things that you would not necessarily sort of put together, but it brings an educational and cultural edge to it as well. I said there would be a couple of things, and I don't know what the second thing is.
New initiative at the moment that you're rolling out, is that right? Or what do you think is the most important things you're doing at the moment?
Right. Personally, I'm an energy advisor, so I was trained to give advice to people who were sort of aiming to tackle the energy crisis, to make their home more efficient, or to deal with benefit issues, try to help them sort of deal with the fuel bills, find more better energy supplies to again reduce their fuel bills and so on. But personally, I work in an area which is the retrofit side of things. So we're looking at energy efficiency of homes at the domestic level. We're looking at insulation. We're looking at potentially solar panels, heat pumps, all the things that we've heard, heating controls. I think that's probably about it. For insulation, obviously, a massive one, because insulation is cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, underfloor insulation, internal wall insulation, all that sort of thing. So it's a massive issue, as has been discussed already.
Can I ask if anyone's got any questions specifically for Didier at the moment? Right, I'm going to ask the other speakers to come back up and bring a chair if you like, and if we haven't got any options. We can stand. See you.
Yeah. Maybe you should take some.
I'm perfectly happy over here.
I've got one just to kick off, and this is a question for everybody. Which is just where do you think Plymouth has advantages? I know Paul touched on this a little bit in terms of energy generation and also carbon economy. You know, what are the opportunities in Plymouth that maybe not elsewhere, or Plymouth in the southwest, we'll say, maybe not there.
All right. Well, so in terms of, I suppose, natural assets, you know, it's for a UK, you might not think it, but it is a sunny region in terms of the amount of insolation that we receive out here. So, you know, solar farms are beneficial. You've probably noticed it's quite windy, you know. And the sea is a massive untapped resource as far as I'm concerned, which is something that's worth it that we're doing. So that low grade heat, what that then leads to is a change in how we emit heat, but we've touched on that. So naturally, our natural assets present us with some opportunity for sure.
No, I agree absolutely with that. Particularly the marine aspect is something which most haven't explored yet, and we've got it there. We tend to think in terms of geothermal as being Dartmoor and granite, but it's easier perhaps to do it with the shore here. I think the other thing we've got is that in a way it's a drawback, but it presents an opportunity. We've got some pretty poor housing stock, and so the ability to improve by insulation is quite large there. And we've set the scene. I mean, there are passive house and estates, I think, which are looking for more energy neutrality. It's our inner city terraced and older, what do we say, listed buildings, which are quite a challenge for Plymouth. Gives us our character, but provides a challenge, let's say, to increase our efficiency of.
Well, my addition would be all of you. I think that's, you know, when we come from how do we make any of these things happen, what we've clearly got is all of you in different organisations, Plymouth Climate Action, initiatives like ideas, and you know, Plymouth is to some extent not cut off, right? But Plymouth has its own sense of history, its own sense of industry, its own culture in a lot of ways. And what that means is that you have a fairly tight community. Like, you know, there's stronger and weaker all over the country, but actually there's a, you know, when I asked Ricky, Zoe, when I asked people I know in Plymouth for a list of organisations who we should invite today or to get involved in the campaign, I just got WhatsApp message after WhatsApp message after WhatsApp message of all these guys, you know, lots and lots of people. And of course, you've clearly got friends and allies in Plymouth City Council as well, enormously helpful. So I would say, you know, look to yourselves, you're the people who can make it happen.
Can I see some hands? Yes?
It's just something thought occurred to me about marine. Has anyone looked into things like using the breakwater for wave or tidal? You know, could you manufacture something on the breakwater, drill a hole in the middle and get a tidal thing going, or like a wave thing? Would that be feasible?
I think it's an intriguing opportunity. Whether it's doable, how much you can actually fix onto the breakwater. In civil engineering terms, I'm not entirely sure. But I am attracted by the idea of onshore wind tagged onto the breakwater. I just don't know at the moment how much energy for the mile of breakwater we can get, you can produce, and whether we can cope with the rise and fall of tide. 6 meters or so is pretty tough. But if it can be done, and it does generate useful power, the connection's relatively easy. We've got another smaller breakwater at 300 meters in Mountbatten. I didn't go so strong on that in the book because although I talked to the company that produced these systems, I didn't get enough information back. And I think there's the whole YouTube for things which are fantastic and we ought to do. When you dig in, they don't really match up. And I don't know whether this one does, but I am intrigued by the idea. Yeah, so maybe that's
so Emmanuel nodding at that. Have you done any research?
I'm equally intrigued, and I have been for a while, but I've not got any answers.
I think Swansea was looking into a tidal power thing, but they'd have to build a structure, whereas we've got structures.
Yeah, the tidal range is a massive factor in how efficient tidal power is, and we've got a lot less range here than they have. So that would be the main aspect, I would say.
Got a question at the back, the one lady with glasses.
Yeah, so you were talking about street by street insulation and helping the most vulnerable, and I'm guessing a lot of that would be council housing, I'm assuming. However, unless it's private housing too. But is there some kind of incentive in place for landlords that have built up big swathes of areas that have students and vulnerable people living in there that don't actually have any say about the conditions they live in because it's the landlord that makes that decision? Like, what kind of incentive is in place to encourage, I guess, those people to listen to the people that are actually living in their houses and are living in single glazed areas with no insulation? Yeah.
It's a huge area of challenge and opportunity. Ricky knows, not everyone will know, before I worked at Friends of the Earth, I was a co-founder and head organiser at Acorn, which is a tenants organisation across the country. We're represented at that time about 20,000 private sector tenants who are, often dealing with fuel poverty, often dealing with cold, damp, leaky homes, with mould in the building. Of course, we touched on ventilation as well as insulation. These things are equally important. I think that, you know, to some extent, the message, when we talked about the grid, for example, we know that over the last 10, 15 years, we have made huge progress in all of the things that are easier. That is not to call them easy. We have done a lot of work, and when I say we, I just mean everyone working on sustainability in general, to do the things that are not as challenging. when we're talking about housing and heating, of course, yes, the council and councils in general have a lot that they can do with their own buildings, especially with council housing. And of course, that overlaps with fuel poverty on a great extent. But part of the thing behind the street by street programme that we're calling for is to say, actually, at this point, we have to get kind of, I suppose, non-discriminatory about it in a way, and actually say the vast majority needs to be done. And that's the other reason why we're saying the government needs to finance this. Now, when we say finance it, we do mean simple cash put down to councils to then tend to the people and then make this thing happen. But we also mean regulation, of course. You know, and we've seen at local level, of course, councils have some flexibility to use planning acts to constrain what new developments do or don't do. But at a national level, of course, for the longest time, the private rented sector has not been regulated in the most appropriate ways. And that combination of carrot and stick, as it is with politicians in general, you have to do it. Here's some money. Make this stuff happen. Yeah, it has to happen across the private rented sector. The home ownership sector, of course, has it's a generalisation, has a little bit more flexibility for people to do it themselves. And of course, if we can, we should. But fundamentally, that money has to be non-discriminatory. Whole housing sector needs to be done.
Whole housing, because all of these incentives seem to be like single dwelling related.
In terms of if you've got a large portfolio of properties, you mean? Is that?
No, I mean, in terms of if you have a street of people who are like, yeah, we all feel like we should get something happening here. There are things for it. If you're going to a company and saying, I want to get a heat pump in my house, they pay you £5,000 towards the cost of that. But presumably, if you're doing it as a free, it's more efficient, and but if you don't get the £5,000,
Yeah.
Can I just broaden that topic with people bringing kind of district heating and that sort of solution, rather than, because this is kind of get the drill rig in and drill 20 holes in the street, but that in itself isn't the most efficient way. The more efficient way would be one small plant, Rolls-Royce nuclear power plant type of solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And say there's lots to unpick there, so I'll try and kind of be fairly concise. But so the street by street approach is great. It does have benefits. We've seen it with some of the installation schemes. Just to point out it, all the numbers I put there are private homes, so the council doesn't have any own stock anymore. So it's outsourced. So social landlords have their own standards to comply with. So the schemes we're talking about and Didier's talking about in the main are private homes. The street by street does work. We've seen it happen. The issue is still, Kirklees, as an example, did an exercise where they've drawn up every single property in certain areas. And I think they got about 45, with totally free funding, they got about 45% take up. So the issue still remains, it's a homeowner decision. Landlords are slightly different. You do have that carrot, you do have that stick. It's enforceable standards that they can let out at. Unfortunately, that's not quite high enough yet. We do have a team in the council who deals with private landlord issues, and we have got funding for them and through them, and they are working on that, and they are offers for landlords. How does it work on a bulk buy basis in terms of 20 households and the funding? All the funding we receive at the minute is predicated to certain households, i.e. low income, fuel poor, certain health conditions, etc. So not everyone is going to be eligible, and that is difficult when you take a street by street approach and you've got 10 neighbours that are really up for it and only 4 of them are out, because there is a disconnect then between, well, what's the point? You can get it and I can't, and that's a difficult circumstance to try and reach or overcome. And I don't have an answer for that in the main, how you do that. So, but it's predicated on the eligibility of the funding effectively, and we can't determine that.
Paul, can I just add one thing? As I mentioned, I went to the conference in Birmingham, the NEA conference. I was speaking to an energy company. I can't remember which one it was, if it was British Gas or not. And this is a known problem. When you have a street, you find that every other one is eligible, meets the criteria for a grant. So you can't take the whole street approach very easily. But it looks like, I don't know if it's a government level or just some freedom that the energy companies have. But if you've got a missing link, if most of the households are eligible and there's one missing link where somebody falls outside the criteria, apparently they've got the funding now available to make sure, okay, you don't meet the criteria for this grant, but we're going to cover that anyway.
Yeah.
So it looks like there's a bit of a shift, but it needs to be much bigger, much faster. Clearly,
That's called Eco Plus. But yeah, what we have, and to speak to you, actually, we have a hugely complicated way of delivering these schemes. And then effectively what the government have done is put an obligation on energy companies to install energy efficiency measures. I asked a question some time ago at a conference, and equated it to, it's like asking a bee farmer to promote vegetarianism. Effectively, you're telling the energy companies to reduce the very thing that they exist for, to make the profit. And so the funding for it is always going to be predicated on delivering the most in the cheapest way. And that's not always the right way to do these things.
Thank you. I'm going to take just one more question from the floor, sorry. We're going to move on to the next section, but there will be a chance to chat with everyone afterwards and give them your questions. So the gentleman there.
Yeah, I think I'm working a lot with community groups and things, and I'm still finding that apathy is still there. We still haven't reached that level yet. There are still lots and lots of people who still just don't get it. And how are we going to do that? Whoever can give a good answer on that can be a millionaire. But I'm still finding, basically in my work, that there are still lots of people who just don't get it. And we're talking about we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and everything else. But underneath that, there's still a lot of people there who just do not get it. How do we get those people?
How do we get through to everyone?
Oh, easy. No, you're absolutely right. It's incredibly difficult. I think that there's a few things to say there. So, and I could go into great detail, I won't, but come on, training program will help. But yeah, there's a few things. So one is what is apathy? So we know that, as I say, statistically, we know that these numbers are there that say most people support climate action now. That's not the same as saying that most people completely understand the problem or have real in-depth knowledge of it, and particularly like actually how it will impact on them. I think, and to be honest, our organisation is partially guilty of this, but of course, biodiversity and the environment is extremely important, but I think to some extent, we've sometimes focused a little too much on that and not on the impacts on ordinary people, in the sense that climate change is likely to make everything more expensive. It's going to impact industrial supply chains. It's going to impact food supply. These are things that matter to everybody across the world and to everybody else. When we get into the conversations with people, we have tried and tested models of persuasive communication. These come from non-violent communication, from, of course, some of the psychology behind certain marketing and stuff. Give you an example. We know that if you look at the Repeal the 8th Abortion campaign in Ireland, both the messenger and the type of message and the way these conversations were conducted shifted the dial on that campaign enormously. We have people speaking to their own family, trusted messengers within the family, moving that message within the family. If you look at, there have been examples on highly controversial issues in America where we've used these models and gone, actually, we can shift people, about 10% of people have their opinions shifted by these models. So we then go down to the street-by-street thing, and I think it's important to say that the street-by-street thing might mean, every house having a borehole, or it may not. It's more about how do we move the people and how do we get past that 45%, where people are taking it up. And again, people speaking to their friends, their neighbours, using the communication models that we're developing. One example is going and seeking pledges when you get to 20% of somebody's social network, go back to the rest and say you've got 20%, and people back it up and sign in their windows. Suddenly people who were apathetic or even against it suddenly change their view. It's a very systematic approach, but it's the one that we have to take.
I just add a little bit to that. Draw the similarity with the uptake of electric vehicles, because I was an early adopter. I did it for environmental reasons. They were expensive and, they didn't go so far, but I wanted to do it. And I guess a lot of the early adopters did that. Now there's a big uptake of electric vehicles. And frankly, the new intake, let's say, which makes up about 70%, I guess, of the EV drivers now, have either done it because technologically it's a better solution, it's faster, whatever, or it's cheaper. It's simply cheaper. So the governments grant for buying a new EV car helped. But what really helped the uptake was benefit in kind for company cars. Suddenly, it was, I'm not stopping for half an hour for a charge. Okay, we'll give you £5,000. Yeah, no problem. Right. And so somehow with this, we are probably all environmentally aware and are very keen to do these things. If we want to expand this group 10 times this, we have to make it better. And I think the new technology of renewables can do that. The message needs to go out. We do need to make it cheaper. And in some respects, the increase in energy prices, tough though it is for those who are fuel poor, is a big help to introducing things which otherwise people wouldn't think twice about. So there's a lot more interest in in the heat pumps now. The message and the education needs to be there to deliver it. And I think the message is starting to get through. The education and the training of installers is trailing some way behind. It's a much tougher thing to design for. And, you know, is it better generally? Well, if you've been in a Scandinavian home and you walk in and it's just comfortably warm, you can't see the radiators and everything's, and you think, oh, this is nice. It's just in my shirt sleeve and it's -20 outside. So we know the solutions can be better, but there's an entrenched, I think we said, industry which is there to build cheap, quick, low quality homes. And so we have to get over that.
Can I just ask you, David, a quick question?
You're going to have a chance to talk to David now. So sorry to interrupt, and sorry to people on Zoom. I didn't see your questions coming through. I know there were some, but we'll try and answer them by email afterwards. We'll bring them to the panel separately. Thank you very much to Stuart and Didier, Paul, Emmanuel, and David for making time to talk to everyone. It's not over yet. This is a chance for everyone in the room now to have some input. We're going to break into 2 groups in this room. So everyone sat in those back 2 rows, if you could turn around and face Ricky, who's going to lead that discussion. People on the front 2 rows, and maybe a few at the back, come to the front. David's going to be in that conference room there. So if you want to really quiz David about his responses, he's more than happy to chat there in person. So more that ask the author session going on in there. I appreciate everyone's been sat around for a long time. If you want to have a week, please do. We're going to crack on with the discussions throughout because we've only got that half an hour. Feel free to bring us getting into place. The best way to a really great idea. So again, thank you everyone for all of that.
And I'd also like to say thank you. Thank you all very much for being here today and for your very valuable contributions to the discussion. I'd like to give special thanks to our speakers, David Bricknell. Sponsoring both the expense of the event and most importantly the printing of the book. So we're really, really grateful for that. Thank you very much. The letting us use this lovely venue. They've been really, really supportive. And all the support we received from the university's technical team, several hours of it. And while at the end of the event, it's only the beginning of the campaign. It's a campaign to bring about a revolution in producing energy for heating and power in the shortest possible time frame, and to ensure that everyone in this country enjoy the comfort of living in a warm home. So to be successful, we do need all hands on board. As Greta Thunberg said, everybody's welcome, everybody's needed. So we thank you for your ideas and suggestions. And now we welcome you to sign up for practical actions. There are a couple of sign-up sheets here which are at the front desk for anybody who wants to help us with these specific actions. Can you help us map, identify or contact other potential partner organisations? Together We're Strong. And can you help us call back and onboard people who would be interested in volunteering, who want to know more about it? Because if you have people, you just contact one or two people, that is a big help. So do sign up. And we'd also like you to pledge your support for the Warm Homes campaign. There's a big pledge sheet at the front. So we're going to keep that and display in places. And if you can get your organisation to sign up, that would be great as well. So let's all work together to make sure there's combustion-free heat, power and energy for Plymouth, for the whole country. And let's make our city green, healthy and prosperous with a decent standard of living for all. So together we can do it. It's a great start here. Thank you all very much for being here today. It's been a long morning. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And thank you all.
Look out for more events throughout the year. We'll be putting more things on. So yeah, do keep in touch.
Yeah, we've got a Facebook page, Climate Action Plymouth, and we really welcome any and all of you to our meetings. Next one, as Zoe said, is on Monday, and it's here or on Zoom. So thank you. I must get
No, 3 minutes. Do you want to have?
No, we don't.